Again. Chapter 13 of 30 Years of Watchtower slave William Schnell. Upheld by the courts. As the worldwide campaign to sell the Watchtower books, booklets, and magazines continued, there were those who began to recognize it for the racket which it was. Officials and other groups were beginning to suspect that perhaps the enormous sales of this Watchtower merchandise and religious goods under the guise of practicing religion were no more than business sales without a license. Here and there articles in the press and in magazines raised questions. There was, for instance, in the year 1940, an article by Stanley High in the Saturday Evening Post entitled Armageddon Inc. Being subjected to this sort of publicity, the Watchtower High Command had to counteract. The Watchtower Society knew that the opposition came from those who were basically religious and valued religious freedom. In designing countermoves to destroy the growing impression that the Watchtower campaign was a racket, the Society took this fact into account. Whenever a town or hamlet arrested Jehovah's Witnesses for selling books without a license, legal action was immediately begun to establish that this was merely preaching by use of the printed page instead of the spoken word. This claim of religious freedom as a justification for their practices was repeated again and again, despite numerous defeats. But they were much too astute to give up this chain of court trials and subsequent convictions, arrests and rearrests, and mass actions followed by still more arrests. This surefire pattern was serving its purpose well. It slowly but surely began to create the impression that Jehovah's Witnesses were being persecuted for practicing their religion, while the accusation that they were conducting a racket gradually fell away. At the same time, the organizational leaders hoped that they were now beginning to realize the fondest dream of the Watchtower Society, to be recognized as the religion of the land of the free and the brave, and then the whole world. This dream was first visualized by the judge, that is Rutherford, during his arrest and subsequent conviction and the dissolution of the society. As I have stated, this was and remains the goal towards which the whole organization gravitates, which is to make the whole world a New World Society. It is their Achilles' heel, too, for it indicates how much they want to become respectable in terms of the standards of this world. They knew that they could ride a long way toward this goal on the widespread of innate sympathy of the American public for the underdog. Before this campaign started, the people had begun to refuse to buy books any longer in ordinary house-to-house work. Now many again became interested, if for no other reason than to support Jehovah's Witnesses in the fight. How this actually worked out in practice is illustrated by an experience I had while witnessing in Plainfield, New Jersey. I had just left one house, having placed 2 bound books there, when I noticed a police car moving slowly towards the curb. The officers called to me, but I pretended that I did not hear them. I proceeded to the porch of the next house. A man watching from the window quickly opened the door for me even before I knocked, and I entered. I thus got unsolicited aid in foiling the attempt of the police to arrest me. My benefactor invited me to sit down and expressed his chagrin over the police. He bought 4 books from me, giving me $1 contribution, and allowed me to stay the whole hour required for the police to get tired and leave. I finished the street unhindered, placing more than 20 books there. Many, many were the times when I had similar experiences. The American public came to our rescue unasked, helping us beat the police-sparked counter-campaign. Now the heading is Religion is a Snare and a Racket. It is amazing how often and how successfully the Watchtower Society changed its tactics to suit the occasion and purpose, at the same time that it was ostensibly putting forth every effort to have the Supreme Court of the United States declare its selling practices as a proper exercise of religious rights. It set out on a course which seemed diametrically opposed and contradictory. The Watchtower Society cleverly throughout the land raised the organized cry, "Religion is a snare and a racket." Thus, by accusing others, it drew away from itself the charge that its book-selling campaign was a racket. Soon Jehovah's Witnesses paraded up and down streets and sandwiched signs with sandwich signs attached to their persons advertising this slogan: religion is a snare and a racket. They claimed they were giving something in kind for the money received, but that religion gives nothing for money given to it. Or as the judge put it, religion gives only husks. This new ruse soon had the desired effect. The furor it created brought about a revulsion against them by many of the more religious-minded and gave rise to widespread mob violence. This forced the police, who previously had been so busy arresting them, to turn around and protect them from harm. Jehovah's Witnesses played their part well. They ceased fighting and surrendered themselves to mob violence, arrests, court trials, boycotts, loss of jobs. Some were given castor oil and made to walk for miles. Thus Jehovah's Witnesses created for themselves the status of a persecuted minority based on the practice of their religion. As a result of all this, the entire policy of the Watchtower Society of selling books and starting companies of Jehovah's Witnesses in all the cities of the land now received a mighty forward push. Under the halo of religious persecution, all the mechanics and instrumentalities employed in the execution of this policy became regarded in the public mind as religious means. But finally, the condition of warfare was spreading so rapidly and was increasing in intensity to such a degree that it threatened to get out of hand. This was the signal for the society to use the proper legal approach to get favorable court action. It finally appealed to its right of freedom of the press, and it already had the courts on its side as a result of its giving the impression of being a religious minority under persecution. The society moved into the picture of Griffin, Georgia. It appealed to the Lovell case there in the higher courts, and finally all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. In their briefs, the leaders asserted that Jehovah's Witnesses were poor Christians who could not afford the usual high-priced media of newspapers to advertise their meetings and propagate their faith. Instead, they had used the poor man's pamphlets and booklets to bring the good news to the people. They cited the example of Patrick Henry and his use of pamphlets, as well as that of Thomas Paine. The Supreme Court of the United States, as might have been expected, held that the books and booklets which Jehovah's Witnesses were distributing were products of a free press, and their distribution was protected by the Constitution of the United States, unmolestedly by city ordinances and licenses. This Lovell versus Griffin case was the first victory of Jehovah's Witnesses, but by no means the last. In fact, it was but the beginning of a long saga of writing into the law of the land the legality of all the practices of Jehovah's Witnesses. This is something no other religion to date has achieved. That is why I feel that unless this can be stopped, America might sometime in the future be the first nation to succumb to this monstrosity. Well, that didn't happen, did it? This is his expectation in the early 50s, but interestingly, America's foremost literary critic of the last generation, Harold Bloom, thinks the Mormons might have the privilege of being the first Protestant group, as he thinks of them, to be the biggest religion in America. More next time on the legal gains of the Watchtower during this period. Now, so I'll put a link into Harold Bloom's thoughts on this very issue. We've done several videos from Bloom's work, his book, The American Religion, where he actually has praise for the Mormons and a few other American groups, such as the Southern Baptist Convention. But on the other hand, he castigates the religion of Jehovah's Witnesses. I thought that was an interesting contrast. So I'll put a video of Harold Bloom talking about the American religion on your screen. See you soon.